You know that moment when your own children look you straight in the eye and tell you they can't help with your medical bills, then walk out of the hospital carrying shopping bags worth more than your monthly medication costs? Well, that happened to me last Tuesday. But what my twin daughters didn't know was that I'd been keeping a secret for the past 3 years, one that would change everything they thought they knew about money, sacrifice, and what it really means to be family. The look on their faces when they found out? Let's just say designer handbags suddenly seemed a lot less important. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 58, I never imagined I'd be sitting in a cardiologist's office listening to words like immediate surgery, high-risk procedure, and substantial medical costs. The heart attack had come out of nowhere, striking me down in the middle of my morning jog through Riverside Park. One moment, I was enjoying the crisp autumn air. The next, I was waking up in the ICU with tubes coming out of places I didn't know tubes could go. Dr. Rodriguez had been gentle but direct about my situation. The damage to my heart required a complex procedure, something called a cardiac catheterization followed by potential bypass surgery. Even with insurance, my out-of-pocket costs would be astronomical. We were looking at nearly $40,000, money I simply didn't have sitting around in my checking account. That's when I made the call to my daughters, Emma and Sophia. My beautiful twin girls, now 28 years old, both living successful lives in Manhattan. Emma worked as a marketing director for a luxury fashion brand, while Sophia had landed a position at a prestigious investment firm. They'd both done well for themselves, exactly as I'd hoped when I had sacrificed everything to put them through private school and college. They arrived at the hospital within hours, both looking polished and put together despite the emergency. Emma swept in wearing a cream-colored coat that I recognized from a magazine advertisement, probably worth more than most people's rent. Sophia followed, her designer heels clicking against the hospital linoleum, clutching a handbag that still had the boutique tags attached. "Mom, thank God you're okay," Emma said, leaning down to hug me carefully around the wires and monitors. Her perfume was expensive, the kind that lingered in the air long after she'd moved on. Sophia took my hand, her perfectly manicured nails a sharp contrast against my pale, IV-bruised skin. "We were so scared when we got your call. What exactly did the doctor say?" I explained the situation as clearly as I could, watching their faces as I outlined the surgical procedures, the recovery time, and, yes, the costs involved. They listened with what seemed like genuine concern, nodding and asking appropriate questions about my care and prognosis. It wasn't until I mentioned the financial aspect that I noticed the subtle shift in their expressions, the slight tightening around Emma's eyes, the way Sophia's grip on my hand loosened just a fraction. $40,000? Emma repeated slowly. "That's after insurance?" "That's my portion, yes. The insurance covers most of it, but with the deductibles and the out-of-network specialists." I trailed off, seeing something change in their faces. The twins exchanged one of those looks they'd been sharing since they were toddlers, an entire conversation happening in the space of a glance. I'd seen that look countless times over the years, usually right before they told me something I wouldn't want to hear. "Mom," Sophia began carefully, "we need to talk about this realistically." Emma nodded, settling into the visitor's chair with practiced elegance. "We want to help, obviously, but $40,000 is a lot of money." "I know it is, sweetheart. I'm not asking you to pay for everything. I just thought maybe between the two of you, if you could help with some of it." "The thing is," Sophia interrupted gently, "we both have significant financial obligations right now. My student loans are still substantial, and I just put a down payment on a co-op in Soho." Emma jumped in to support her sister's reasoning. "And I'm dealing with my own expenses. The fashion industry requires a certain image, you know? I have to invest in my wardrobe, my apartment, networking events. It's all part of building my career." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. These were my daughters, the children I'd raised alone after their father walked out when they were barely 3 years old. The same girls I'd worked 3 jobs to support, who I'd driven to every dance recital, soccer game, and school play, despite being exhausted beyond measure. "So you're saying you can't help at all?" I asked quietly. The twins looked uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats like they were in a business meeting discussing an unfortunate budget shortfall. It's not that we don't want to help, Emma said. It's that we genuinely cannot afford to take on additional expenses right now. We're both still establishing ourselves financially. Sophia nodded earnestly. Mom, you raised us to be responsible with money.
Taking on debt we can't handle wouldn't be smart for any of us. I felt something cold settle in my chest, and it had nothing to do with my heart condition.
I see.
There are other options, Emma continued brightly, as if she were solving a minor inconvenience. Payment plans, medical loans, maybe even a GoFundMe campaign. Lots of people use crowdfunding for medical expenses these days. You could sell some things, Sophia added helpfully. Downsize your apartment. Maybe get something smaller and more affordable. You don't really need all that space now that we're grown up. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. These suggestions weren't entirely unreasonable, but hearing them from my own daughters, delivered with such casual detachment, felt like another kind of heart attack entirely. We should probably get going, Emma said, checking her phone. I have a dinner meeting with some clients, and Sophia has that charity gala tonight. Charity gala. I almost laughed at the irony, but the sound that came out was more like a sob. Of course, I managed. You both have important things to do. They each gave me careful kisses on the forehead, promising to call soon and check on my progress. I watched them gather their things, Emma's designer coat draped over her arm like a security blanket, Sophia adjusting that expensive handbag on her shoulder. As they walked toward the door, I caught sight of something that made my breath catch. Sophia's shopping bag from earlier, which had been sitting forgotten beside her chair, had tipped over slightly. I could see the contents, a pair of shoes, still in their box, with a price tag that made my eyes water. $800. For shoes. Emma noticed my stare and quickly helped her sister gather the bag. Oh, those, Sophia said with a slight blush. I picked them up on the way here. They were the last pair in my size, and I'd been wanting them for months. $800. While I was lying in a hospital bed, worrying about how to pay for surgery that might save my life, my daughter had stopped to buy shoes that cost more than most people's monthly groceries. After they left, I lay in that sterile room listening to the beeping of machines and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My daughters, whom I'd raised to be compassionate and generous, had essentially told me they couldn't afford to help with my medical emergency. But they could afford luxury items that most people would consider completely frivolous. The nursing staff was kind, bringing me extra blankets and checking on me frequently throughout the night. But kindness doesn't pay medical bills, and I found myself staring at the ceiling wondering how I'd gotten to this point in my life. Had I failed as a mother? Had I somehow taught them that material possessions were more important than family obligations? Or had their success simply elevated them to a level where my problems seemed small and manageable to everyone except me? The next few days passed in a blur of medical consultations, insurance phone calls, and financial planning sessions with the hospital's billing department. The social worker was sympathetic, but realistic about my options. A payment plan would stretch the debt out over several years, with interest. A medical loan would require excellent credit and stable income, neither of which I had in abundance. The GoFundMe suggestion felt humiliating, like begging strangers for money when my own children had walked away. Emma and Sophia called dutifully every day, asking about my condition and my comfort level. They sent flowers, expensive arrangements from trendy florists that probably cost more than a week's worth of groceries. But when I brought up the financial aspect of my care, they quickly changed the subject or offered the same generic suggestions about payment plans and downsizing. It was during one of these conversations that something inside me finally snapped. Sophia was telling me about her weekend plans, some exclusive restaurant opening that required a specific dress code and connections to even get a reservation. The outfit alone cost me nearly $2,000, she laughed. But it's an investment in networking. You never know who you might meet at these events. $2,000 on an outfit for one evening, while her mother was trying to figure out how to pay for life-saving surgery. Sophia, do you remember when you were 12 and you needed emergency dental work after that skateboarding accident? Mom, that was years ago. Why are you bringing that up now? Do you remember how I paid for it? The oral surgeon, the follow-up appointments, the special procedures to save your tooth? There was silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her trying to figure out where this conversation was heading. I worked overtime for 3 months. Double shifts at the diner, extra cleaning jobs on weekends. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the pieces I'd been saving to pass down to you and Emma someday. Mom, please, don't make this about guilt. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, sweetheart. I'm trying to help you understand something important about family and sacrifice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
But she had already ended the call, claiming her other line was ringing with an important work matter. That night, alone in my hospital bed, I made a decision. If my daughters couldn't or wouldn't help me through this crisis, I would have to find another way. But more importantly, I realized that our relationship had reached a point where some fundamental truths needed to be revealed. Because what Emma and Sophia didn't know, what I'd been carefully keeping from them for the past 3 years, was that their struggling mother wasn't quite as financially helpless as they assumed. In fact, the secret I'd been guarding so carefully was about to change everything they thought they knew about sacrifice, responsibility, and what it really means to take care of the people you love. The irony was almost perfect. While they were worrying about their images and their networking events and their designer accessories, they had no idea that their mother had been living a double life of sorts. And when they found out the truth, those expensive handbags and $800 shoes were going to seem like very small priorities indeed. But first, I had to get through this surgery. And then, once I was strong enough, I was going to have a conversation with my daughters that was long overdue. A conversation about values, about family, and about the difference between what we think we need and what actually matters when everything else falls away. The truth has a way of surfacing at exactly the right moment, even when we think we've buried it too deep to ever be found. And sometimes the people who need to hear it the most are the ones standing closest to us, carrying shopping bags full of things that will never love them back the way their family does. As I drifted off to sleep that night, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle hum of hospital machinery, I found myself almost looking forward to the moment when my secret would finally be revealed. Because after 28 years of putting my daughters first, of sacrificing my own needs for their comfort and success, it was time for them to learn some hard truths about the woman who had raised them. And those truths were going to cost a lot more than designer handbags. The surgery went better than expected, though recovery was proving to be a different challenge entirely. 3 weeks later, I was back in my small apartment in Queens, surrounded by pill bottles and follow-up appointment schedules, trying to navigate the maze of medical billing that had begun arriving in my mailbox like an avalanche of financial doom. Emma and Sophia had visited exactly twice since I'd been discharged. Both visits had been brief, filled with uncomfortable small talk about my healing progress and careful avoidance of any mention of the mounting bills. They brought expensive get-well gifts, luxury bath products, and gourmet food baskets that probably cost more than my monthly physical therapy copays, but somehow never managed to bring up the subject of actually helping with expenses. It was during one particularly frustrating afternoon, while I was on hold with the insurance company for the 3rd time that week, that I received an unexpected phone call. The number wasn't one I recognized, but something about it seemed familiar. Mrs. Chen, this is Jonathan Martinez from Riverside Community Foundation. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. The Riverside Community Foundation. My heart rate picked up slightly, though whether from anxiety or anticipation, I couldn't tell. No, Mr. Martinez, it's fine. What can I do for you? Actually, ma'am, it's what we can do for you. I'm calling because we've been trying to reach you regarding the Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund. There seems to have been some confusion with our records, and we wanted to verify some information. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of the secret I'd been carrying for so long. What kind of information do you need? Well, we have you listed as both the beneficiary contact and the fund administrator, which seems unusual. Our records show that you've been managing the scholarship distributions for the past 3 years, but we also have documentation showing that you're listed as Margaret Chen, the person the fund was supposed to be established to honor? Could you help us clarify this discrepancy?
The jig was up, as they say, or at least it was about to be. Mr. Martinez, could we perhaps schedule a time to meet in person? This might be easier to explain face to face. Of course, Mrs. Chen. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? I could come to your location if that's more convenient, given your recent medical situation. Medical situation. Word traveled fast in certain circles, apparently. That would be perfect. Thank you. After hanging up, I sat in my living room looking at the stack of medical bills on my coffee table, then at the framed photos of Emma and Sophia scattered around the room. Pictures from their graduations, their first jobs, their various accomplishments over the years. In every single photo, they were smiling, confident, successful. And in every single photo, I was standing slightly behind them, proud, but somehow separate from their world of achievement. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that their mother's name wasn't just Margaret Chen, at least not in the way they understood it. The next afternoon, Jonathan Martinez arrived at my apartment carrying a thick folder and wearing the kind of serious expression that suggested our conversation was going to be more complicated than a simple record clarification. Mrs. Chen, I have to admit, this situation is quite unusual. In 30 years of foundation work, I've never encountered anything like this. I imagine not, I said, offering him tea, which he politely declined. According to our records, the Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship was established 3 years ago with an initial endowment of $8 million. The fund has distributed over $400,000 in scholarships to students from low-income families pursuing careers in healthcare and social work. I nodded, watching his face carefully. The interesting thing is, he continued, all of our correspondence has been with a Margaret Chen who claims to be administering the fund in memory of a deceased Margaret Chen. But our research suggests that you, the very much alive Margaret Chen, are actually the person who established the fund in the first place. That's correct, I said simply. His eyebrows raised slightly. So you created a memorial scholarship fund in your own name? I did. May I ask why? I took a deep breath, preparing to explain something I'd never had to put into words before. Mr. Martinez, have you ever wanted to give away money without having to deal with the complicated emotions and expectations that come with people knowing you have money to give? He looked thoughtful. I can't say that I have, no. 3 years ago, I came into some money, a significant amount of money, and I wanted to use it to help people, particularly young people who were in situations similar to what my daughters and I had faced when they were growing up. But you didn't want recognition for your philanthropy? I didn't want the complications that come with recognition. People treat you differently when they know you have money. Family members, especially, can develop very specific expectations about what you should do with your resources. Jonathan Martinez was taking notes now, his pen moving quickly across his legal pad. So you created a fictional deceased version of yourself to serve as the namesake for the scholarship? Essentially, yes. It allowed me to give away money in a way that felt meaningful without changing the dynamics of my personal relationships. And the $2.8 million endowment came from where, if you don't mind me asking? This was the part of the story that even I sometimes had trouble believing. I won the lottery, Mr. Martinez. The New York State Powerball, specifically, 3 years and 4 months ago. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my neighbor's television through the thin apartment walls. You won the lottery? He repeated slowly. $87 million before taxes. I took the lump sum, which came to about $52 million after all the deductions. His pen had stopped moving entirely. Mrs. Chen, forgive me for being blunt, but if you have that kind of money, why are you living in this apartment? And why are you dealing with medical bill collection calls? I smiled. Probably the first genuine smile I'd managed in weeks. Because, Mr. Martinez, having money and having people know you have money are two entirely different experiences. And I've been very curious to see how the people in my life would behave if they thought I was still the struggling single mother they'd always known. Including your daughters? Especially my daughters. He was staring at me now with the kind of fascination usually reserved for exotic zoo animals. So they have no idea about the lottery winnings? None whatsoever. As far as they know, I'm still working part-time at the hospital cafeteria and struggling to make ends meet on Social Security and a small pension. But surely, with your recent medical emergency, this would be the perfect time to reveal your financial situation. You could pay for your surgery without any hardship. I nodded toward the stack of bills on my coffee table. I could pay for my surgery with the interest my money earned just last month. But that's not really the point anymore, is it? Jonathan Martinez was taking notes now, his pen moving quickly across his legal pad. So you created a fictional, deceased version of yourself to serve as the namesake for the scholarship. Essentially, yes. It allowed me to give away money in a way that felt meaningful without changing the dynamics of my personal relationships. And the $2.8 million endowment came from where, if you don't mind me asking? As far as they know, I'm still working part-time at the hospital cafeteria and struggling to make ends meet on Social Security and a small pension. But surely, with your recent medical emergency, this would be the perfect time to reveal your financial situation. You could pay for your surgery without any hardship. I nodded toward the stack of bills on my coffee table. I could pay for my surgery with the interest my money earned just last month. But that's not really the point anymore, is it? Jonathan Martinez was silent for a long moment, clearly trying to process the implications of what I was telling him. Mrs. Chen, what exactly is the point? The point, Mr. Martinez, is that my daughters just spent the last 3 weeks explaining to me why they can't afford to help with my medical bills while simultaneously spending thousands of dollars on luxury items they absolutely don't need. The point is that I raised 2 women who apparently believe that their mother should face financial ruin alone while they maintain their comfortable lifestyles. And you wanted to test whether they would step up in a real crisis. I wanted to know who they really are when it matters. And unfortunately, now I do. We spent the next hour going through the paperwork needed to clarify my dual identity as both the scholarship fund administrator and its fictional namesake.
Jonathan Martinez was professional throughout the process, but I could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to understand the psychology behind my elaborate deception. Mrs. Chen, he said as he prepared to leave, what happens now? Are you planning to reveal the truth to your daughters? I think that decision might be taken out of my hands soon, I said. These things have a way of coming to light eventually. He was right to be curious about my plans, because the truth was, I hadn't fully decided what to do with the information I'd gathered about Emma and Sophia's priorities. Part of me hoped they might still surprise me, might find some way to demonstrate that family meant more to them than maintaining their expensive lifestyles. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, was tired of protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. That evening, as if summoned by some cosmic sense of timing, both of my daughters called within minutes of each other. Emma went first, chatting brightly about her latest project at work, a campaign for a luxury watch brand that was revolutionizing how people think about time. Mom, you should see these watches. They start at $15,000, but the craftsmanship is absolutely incredible. I'm thinking about getting one for myself once I finish this campaign. It would be a great way to celebrate the success. $15,000 for a watch, while her mother was rationing heart medications to make them last longer between pharmacy trips. That sounds lovely, sweetheart, I managed to say. How are you feeling? Any update on those medical bills? There it was, the perfunctory check-in that let her feel like she'd addressed the elephant in the room without actually having to do anything about it. Still working on it, I said. The payment plan options aren't great, but I'll figure something out. I'm sure you will, Mom. You've always been so resourceful. Resourceful. As if my current financial crisis was just another creative challenge to be solved through clever budgeting and determination. Sophia's call came 20 minutes later, filled with excitement about her latest purchase, a handbag she'd been coveting for months. Mom, I finally got it. The Hermes Birkin I've been wanting forever. I had to get on a waiting list last year, but it finally came in. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I didn't ask how much it cost. I didn't want to know. I'm so happy for you, honey. Thanks. Oh, how are you doing? Still dealing with all those hospital bills? Still dealing with them. Yes. Well, I'm sure you'll work it out. Maybe you could talk to that social worker again. Sometimes they have programs for people in your situation. People in my situation. As if I were some kind of charity case rather than her mother who had sacrificed everything to give her and her sister every possible advantage in life. After both calls ended, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about the strange double life I'd been leading. On one hand, there was Margaret Chen, the struggling retiree, worried about medical bills and living on a fixed income. On the other hand, there was Margaret Chen, the secret philanthropist, with enough money to solve not just her own problems, but the problems of hundreds of other people as well. The disconnect between these two versions of myself was becoming harder to maintain, especially as I watched my daughters demonstrate exactly who they'd become when faced with their mother's genuine need. It was then that I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. Emma, it's Mom. I need you and Sophia to come over this weekend. There's something important we need to discuss. Mom, is everything okay? You sound strange. Everything's fine, sweetheart. But we need to have a family conversation. Can you both be here Saturday afternoon? I guess so. Sophia has that charity auction on Saturday night, but she could probably come for a few hours. Charity auction. Perfect. That's fine. Just make sure you're both here by 2 o'clock.
And Emma? Yes, wear something comfortable. We're going to be talking for a while. After hanging up, I walked to my bedroom and opened the small safe hidden behind my dresser. Inside were documents that told a very different story about Margaret Chen's financial situation than the one my daughters had been living with for the past 3 years. Bank statements, investment portfolios, the original lottery ticket, and a folder full of scholarship recipient thank you letters that would have explained everything if anyone had bothered to ask the right questions. Saturday was going to be interesting, but first I had one more phone call to make. Jonathan Martinez had given me his direct number and told me to call if I needed anything related to the scholarship fund documentation. Mr. Martinez, it's Margaret Chen. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I've decided it's time to make some changes to how the fund operates. What kind of changes, Mrs. Chen? I want to hold a press conference next week. I want to announce a major expansion of the scholarship program, and I want to do it publicly with full media coverage. There was a pause. That would certainly resolve the identity confusion we've been dealing with. That's the idea. And Mr. Martinez, I want my daughters to be there. I want them to see exactly who their mother really is, and I want them to understand what it means when family doesn't show up for each other. Are you sure about this approach, Mrs. Chen? Once this information becomes public, there's no going back to your previous anonymity. I looked around my modest apartment, at the medical bills still stacked on my coffee table, at the photos of my daughters living their successful, expensive lives while their mothers struggled in secret. I'm absolutely sure, Mr. Martinez, it's time for some truth-telling in this family, and I think a public forum is exactly what we need to make sure everyone understands what we're really talking about. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement about the future. Because while my daughters thought they knew everything about money and success and what it meant to live well, they were about to get an education in family values that no amount of designer handbags could have prepared them for. The truth was coming out, whether they were ready for it or not. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that makes New York feel almost magical. I had spent the morning preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my relationship with my daughters. The medical bills were still stacked on my coffee table, but now they served a different purpose entirely. They weren't just evidence of my financial struggles anymore. They were proof of a test that Emma and Sophia had failed spectacularly. At exactly 2 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of expensive heels clicking up the stairs to my second-floor apartment. They arrived together, as they often did, presenting a united front that had served them well throughout their childhood, but was about to become a serious disadvantage.
Emma knocked with her usual brisk efficiency. When I opened the door, I was struck by how perfectly put together they both looked, even for a casual family visit. Emma wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, paired with leather boots that gleamed with the kind of care that expensive things receive. Sophia had opted for a silk blouse and tailored pants that screamed designer quality, her new Birkin bag positioned just so on her shoulder. They looked successful, confident, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Hi, Mom," Emma said, giving me a careful hug that avoided wrinkling her outfit. "You look better. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. Come in, both of you." Sophia glanced around the apartment with the kind of polite interest that suggested she was mentally cataloging everything that could be improved with a sufficient budget. "Mom, have you given any more thought to what we discussed about downsizing? This place is really quite spacious for just one person." I gestured toward the living room where I had arranged 3 chairs in a triangle formation. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to cover this afternoon." They exchanged one of their twin looks, a flash of silent communication that suggested they were prepared for another conversation about my stubborn refusal to accept their practical advice about my financial situation. "Before we start talking," I said, settling into my chair, "I want you both to look around this room and tell me what you see." Emma glanced around obligingly. "Your living room? Look more carefully. What do you see that tells you something about who I am and how I live?"
Sophia joined in the exercise, her gaze moving from the modest furniture to the stack of medical bills to the framed photos of their various achievements over the years. "I see someone who's been struggling financially," Emma said gently. "Someone who's tried to maintain their independence, but might need to accept some help. Someone who's worked hard their whole life and deserves better than to worry about medical bills in retirement," Sophia added, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope that maybe I'd misjudged their capacity for empathy. "Those are very diplomatic answers," I said. "Now let me tell you what I see when I look around this room." I stood up and walked to my small bookshelf, pulling out a thick folder that had been hiding behind a row of paperback novels. "I see a woman who has been conducting an experiment for the past 3 years, an experiment designed to answer a very specific question about the people she loves most in the world." Emma and Sophia were watching me now with the kind of focused attention they usually reserved for important work presentations. The question was this: if I needed help, really needed help, would my daughters be there for me? Not just with kind words and expensive flowers, but with actual sacrifice and genuine support. "Mom," Emma interrupted, "of course we'd be there for you. We are here for you." "Are you?" I asked, opening the folder and pulling out the first document. "Because 3 weeks ago, I asked you both to help me with medical expenses that I genuinely couldn't afford alone. And what was your response?" Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "We explained our financial situations. We're both dealing with significant expenses right now." "Significant expenses," I repeated, pulling out my phone and scrolling to a photo I'd screenshotted from Emma's social media account. "Like this $15,000 watch you were posting about on Instagram yesterday." Emma's face flushed slightly. "That was a work purchase. I need to maintain a certain image for my job. And this?" I showed Sophia a photo of her displaying the Birkin bag to her followers. "How much did this cost, sweetheart?" "Mom, these aren't just frivolous purchases. They're investments in our careers, our futures." I set my phone down and looked at both of them with the kind of steady gaze that had gotten them through homework battles and teenage dramatics years earlier. "Your mother was lying in a hospital bed, facing the possibility of not being able to afford surgery that could save her life, and you both chose to spend more money on accessories in a single week than it would have taken to solve my entire problem." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth neither of them had been forced to confront before. "But here's the interesting part," I continued, pulling another document from my folder. "The experiment revealed something I didn't expect to learn." Emma and Sophia were both staring at the papers in my hands now, clearly trying to figure out what kind of documentation I could possibly have that would change the dynamic of this conversation.
It revealed that you don't actually know who your mother is. I handed Emma the first document. It was a bank statement, but not the kind she was expecting to see. Her eyes widened as she read the numbers, then widened further as she checked the account name. "This can't be right," she said quietly. "What is it?" Sophia demanded, leaning over to see what had caused such a dramatic change in her sister's expression. The number at the bottom of the statement read, $47,300,000. "Mom," Emma's voice was barely a whisper, "what is this?" I pulled out the second document and handed it to Sophia. It was the original lottery ticket, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve, along with the official notification of winnings from the New York State Gaming Commission. 3 years ago, I won the Powerball, $87 million before taxes. Sophia stared at the lottery ticket like it was written in a foreign language. "This is impossible. If you won the lottery, why are you living here? Why do you work at the hospital cafeteria? Why were you worried about medical bills?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were when it mattered, and now I know." I pulled out the third set of documents, the ones that would complete their understanding of exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. These are the records for the Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund. Over the past 3 years, I've donated $2.8 million to help students from low-income families afford college, students who remind me of who you both used to be before you decided that expensive handbags were more important than helping your mother in a medical crisis. Emma was holding her head in her hands now, the bank statement crumpled in her lap. Sophia was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "You've been lying to us for 3 years?"
Sophia's voice was shrill with disbelief. "I've been waiting for 3 years. Waiting to see if my daughters would choose to help their mother or choose to protect their own comfort. And when the moment came, when I actually needed you, you both made your choice very clear." "But if you have all this money," Emma said, lifting her head to look at me, "why did you let us think you were struggling? Why did you put us through that guilt?" "Guilt?" I repeated. "Emma, you felt guilty? Because from where I was sitting, you seemed perfectly comfortable explaining why you couldn't afford to help while simultaneously spending thousands of dollars on things you don't need." "That's not fair," Sophia protested. "If we had known you were rich, of course we would have acted differently." "Would you? Or would you have acted differently because you knew I could afford to give you money instead of asking you for help?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge neither of them knew how to answer. "I raised you both to be generous, compassionate people," I continued. "I sacrificed everything I had to give you every possible advantage. I worked 3 jobs to pay for your private school. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to cover Emma's emergency dental work. I went without decent clothes for years so you could have the latest fashions." "We know that, Mom," Emma said quietly. "We've always been grateful." "Have you? Because when I needed you to demonstrate that same kind of sacrifice, that same willingness to put family first, you both failed spectacularly." I pulled out the final document, the one that would drive home exactly how completely they had misunderstood the situation. "This is the receipt for your wedding, Emma, the one where you thanked me so gracefully for my small contribution to the costs." Emma's face went pale as she recognized the invoice. "I paid for 60% of your wedding, not from some imaginary divorce settlement, but from my lottery winnings. While you were worried about your mother embarrassing you with her financial struggles, she was quietly funding the most important day of your life." "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "And Sophia, these are the records from when you needed that down payment for your co-op last year. Remember how stressed you were about getting approved for the mortgage?" Sophia nodded mutely. "Your generous Aunt Margaret, who suddenly appeared with a gift of $50,000? That was me. Your struggling mother using a fake name so you wouldn't feel awkward about accepting money from someone you thought couldn't afford it." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my daughters. They weren't just quiet, they were stunned into a kind of paralysis that suggested their entire understanding of reality was being restructured in real time. "So,"
Let me ask you again, I said, my voice steady but firm. When your mother needed help with medical bills, that could have been solved with less money than you spent on accessories last month. Why couldn't you find a way to help? Neither of them answered immediately. They were both staring at the documents spread across my coffee table like pieces of a puzzle they'd been trying to solve their entire adult lives. We didn't know, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. You didn't know I had money. No. But you did know I had raised you, supported you, sacrificed for you your entire lives, and when I asked for help, you decided your comfort was more important than my health. Mom, please, Sophia said, tears starting to form in her eyes. This isn't fair. You can't test us like this without telling us it's a test. Life is a test, sweetheart. Every day we're tested on our values, our priorities, our willingness to show up for the people we claim to love. And when your mother was in the hospital facing surgery she couldn't afford, you both got an F. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a bottle of water and taking a long drink before continuing. But the test isn't over yet, because now you know the truth about my financial situation, and we're going to see what you do with that information. What do you mean? Emma asked. I mean that tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference to announce a major expansion of the Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund. I'm going public with my lottery winnings and my philanthropic work. The story is going to be about a mother who used her windfall to help other families while her own daughters refused to help with her medical bills. Both of them were staring at me in horror now. Mom, you can't, Sophia said. Think about how this will look.
Our careers, our reputations. Now you're worried about how things will look? I asked. 3 weeks ago, you were perfectly comfortable with the optics of abandoning your mother in a medical crisis. But now that money is involved, suddenly image matters? That's not what we meant, Emma protested. Isn't it? Because it sounds to me like you're more worried about people knowing you refuse to help your mother than you are about the fact that you actually refuse to help your mother. I pulled out my phone and showed them the press release draft that Jonathan Martinez had helped me prepare. Local lottery winner Margaret Chen announces $50 million expansion of scholarship fund, citing family values and the importance of helping others in times of need. The press conference is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow at the Riverside Community Center. $50 million! Sophia's voice was barely audible. I'm giving away almost everything except what I need to live comfortably and cover my medical expenses. Because unlike some people I know, I understand that having money means you have a responsibility to help others, especially when they're in genuine need. Emma was crying openly now, understanding perhaps for the first time the full magnitude of how badly she and her sister had misjudged both the situation and their mother. What do you want from us? She asked through her tears. I want you to think very carefully about the kind of people you've become and the kind of people you want to be going forward. I want you to understand that love isn't just about feelings and kind words. It's about action and sacrifice and showing up when it's inconvenient. I gathered up all the documents and returned them to their folder. And I want you to know that your mother loves you enough to show you the truth about yourselves, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Because that's what real family does. They don't protect you from the consequences of your choices. They help you become better people. Mom, Sophia said quietly, what can we do to fix this? I looked at both of my daughters, these accomplished, beautiful, successful women who had somehow lost sight of the values I thought I'd taught them. You can start by figuring out why you thought your designer handbags were more important than your mother's health. And then you can decide what you're going to do differently going forward. Are you going to change your will? Emma asked, and immediately looked horrified that she'd voiced the thought. Emma, I said sadly, the fact that you just asked that question tells me we have even more work to do than I realized. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from their childhood memories of financial struggle to their current understanding of money and family obligations.
By the time they left, both of them were emotionally drained and clearly grappling with a complete reframing of their relationship with their mother. The press conference the next morning went exactly as planned. Local media covered the story of the mysterious philanthropist who had been secretly helping families throughout the community. The scholarship recipients were there to speak about how the Margaret Chen Fund had changed their lives. And yes, my daughters were there too, sitting in the back row, looking appropriately chastened as they watched their mother receive recognition for the generosity they had failed to show. The story made regional news, then national news, as people responded to the narrative of a lottery winner who had quietly helped others while testing whether her own family would help her in return. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 6 months later, Emma and Sophia both made significant changes to their spending habits and their relationship with money. Emma started volunteering with financial literacy programs for young women. Sophia established her own small scholarship fund for students studying social work. They both contributed substantially to my medical expenses, though by then it was more symbolic than necessary. More importantly, they began to understand that true wealth isn't measured in designer handbags or expensive watches, but in the willingness to sacrifice for the people you love when they need you most. The Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund now operates openly under my real name. And I've discovered that being publicly generous is almost as rewarding as being secretly generous. Almost. But nothing will ever be quite as enlightening as learning who your children really are when they think no one is watching. Because in the end, the most expensive lesson they learned wasn't about money at all. It was about values, priorities, and what it really means to love someone enough to put their needs before your own comfort. And that's a lesson worth more than any lottery jackpot ever could be.
The months following the press conference brought changes I hadn't anticipated when I first decided to reveal the truth about my financial situation. The story of the secret lottery winner and the scholarship fund had touched something deep in people, and suddenly I found myself receiving letters from across the country. Parents writing about their own struggles with ungrateful children, adult children expressing guilt about how they'd treated their aging parents, young people thanking me for creating opportunities they never thought they'd have. But the most interesting letters came from other lottery winners, people who understood the unique challenges that come with sudden wealth. They wrote about the isolation, the way relationships change when money enters the equation, the difficulty of knowing whether people care about you or your bank account. Several of them had implemented their own versions of my test, curious to see how family and friends would respond to genuine need when they believed resources were limited. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a woman named Patricia Williams in Arizona, who had won a smaller lottery jackpot 5 years earlier and had been quietly observing her family's behavior ever since. When I told him I was having financial difficulties and asked if he could help me with some expenses, he suggested I sell my house and move into a senior living facility. Meanwhile, he'd just bought a boat. A boat, Margaret, while his mother was supposedly struggling to pay her electric bill. Patricia had decided to follow my lead and reveal the truth about her financial stability at her son's next family gathering. She wanted to know if her experience would be similar to mine, or if perhaps her son might surprise her with a capacity for growth and change that my daughters had eventually demonstrated. These connections with other people navigating similar challenges became unexpectedly important to me. I realized that my experiment hadn't just been about testing Emma and Sophia. It had also been about understanding something fundamental about human nature, family dynamics, and the complex relationship between money and love. The scholarship fund continued to grow, both from my contributions and from donations inspired by the publicity around my story. We were now helping over 200 students annually, and the thank you letters from recipients and their families filled several filing cabinets in my apartment. Each story reminded me why I'd chosen to give away most of my winnings rather than hoarding them for a lifestyle I didn't actually want.
One particularly moving letter came from a young woman named Maria Santos, whose mother had cleaned office buildings at night to support her family while Maria pursued her nursing degree with help from our scholarship. Miss Chen, Maria wrote, "My mother died last month, and I wanted you to know that her last words to me were about how grateful she was that people like you existed in the world. She said that when someone gives you a chance to build a better life, you have a responsibility to use that chance to help others build better lives too. I graduate next month, and I want you to know that every patient I help will be helped partly because of your generosity." Reading letters like Maria's helped me understand something important about the choice I'd made to prioritize giving over accumulating wealth. The money I'd spent on scholarships wasn't just changing the lives of individual recipients. It was creating ripple effects that would touch countless other people over the years to come. Maria would help thousands of patients throughout her career. Other scholarship recipients would become teachers, social workers, doctors, and counselors, each one carrying forward the investment that had been made in their potential. By contrast, the money Emma and Sophia had spent on luxury items would be forgotten within a few years. The expensive handbags would go out of style, the designer shoes would wear out, the fancy watches would be replaced by newer models. None of these purchases would create lasting value or help anyone beyond the temporary satisfaction of ownership. This realization helped me understand why their refusal to help with my medical bills had been so devastating. It wasn't just about the money itself. It was about the choice to prioritize things that didn't matter over relationships that did. It was about valuing image over impact, comfort over compassion. But I also began to understand something else as the months passed. My daughter's behavior hadn't developed in a vacuum. Somewhere along the way, in my efforts to give them every advantage I'd never had, I had failed to teach them some essential lessons about money, generosity, and responsibility to others. This insight led me to make another decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I invited Emma and Sophia to join me as co-administrators of the scholarship fund, not as figureheads or honorary board members, but as active participants in the process of evaluating applications, meeting with recipients, and understanding the real impact of our giving. Initially, they were both hesitant. Emma worried about the time commitment interfering with her marketing career. Sophia was concerned about the emotional weight of reading so many stories about financial hardship. But I made it clear that this wasn't really a request. It was an opportunity for them to learn something essential about the responsibility that comes with privilege. Their first day working with scholarship applications was an education for all of us. I watched as they read through dozens of essays from students describing their families' financial struggles, their dreams for the future, and their determination to succeed despite overwhelming obstacles. Emma broke down crying while reading an application from a 17-year-old whose father had died in a construction accident, leaving his mother to support 4 children on a part-time income. The student had been working twice as hard as I ever did, and he had nothing. How did I become someone who could spend hundreds of dollars on a dinner while people like this exist? After Jennifer left our meeting, Sophia sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "She's going to save lives," Sophia said finally. "The money we gave her is literally going to save children's lives. And I spent almost the same amount on a handbag that I've used maybe 3 times." These realizations marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in how both of my daughters approached money and success. Emma began volunteering with financial literacy programs, teaching young people about budgeting, saving, and making conscious choices about spending. She discovered that she had a gift for explaining complex financial concepts in ways that made sense to people who had never been taught about money management. Sophia started working with families who were navigating medical crises similar to what our family had experienced. She helped them understand insurance procedures, negotiate with billing departments, and find resources for financial assistance. Her professional background in finance made her particularly effective at helping people organize their medical expenses and develop realistic payment plans. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they related to me and to their own success. They began to understand that their accomplishments, while genuine, had been built on a foundation of support and sacrifice that they had taken for granted. They started asking questions about my own dreams and ambitions, many of which I had set aside to focus on their needs when they were growing up. These conversations led to another unexpected development. With the security of my lottery winnings and the satisfaction of seeing my daughters grow into more compassionate people, I decided to pursue something I had always wanted to do but never had the resources to attempt: writing a book about my experience. The memoir, which I titled The Margaret Chen Test: What I Learned About Family, Money, and Love, became a bestseller within 6 months of publication. It resonated with readers who were grappling with similar questions about the relationship between financial success and family values. Book clubs across the country used it as a starting point for discussions about generosity, entitlement, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. The success of the book led to speaking engagements at universities, conferences, and community organizations. I found myself traveling the country, sharing my story, and listening to others share theirs. Each event reinforced my belief that the issues my family had faced were not unique, but rather symptoms of a broader cultural problem about how we think about money, success, and our obligations to each other. One particularly memorable speaking engagement took place at a conference for financial advisors. These were professionals who worked with wealthy clients daily, helping them manage investments and plan for the future. I expected them to focus on the technical aspects of sudden wealth management, but instead, they were most interested in the psychological and relational challenges I had navigated. Mrs. Chen, one advisor asked during the question and answer session, how would you advise other parents who find themselves in a position where they have significantly more resources than their adult children realize? It was a thoughtful question that got to the heart of something many wealthy parents struggle with: how to use their resources to help their children grow into responsible adults rather than entitled dependents. I think the key is to remember that money is a tool, not a goal, I answered. If you use your wealth to solve all of your children's problems, you rob them of the opportunity to develop resilience and resourcefulness. But if you pretend to have no resources when they genuinely need help, you risk damaging the trust that healthy relationships require. So how do you find the balance? You test their values before you test their comfort. You make sure they understand the difference between wants and needs, between temporary setbacks and genuine crises. And you teach them that having resources means having responsibilities, not just opportunities. After the conference, several attendees approached me with their own stories about family wealth and the challenges it had created. A man whose inheritance had turned his children into adults who expected financial support without reciprocal care. A woman whose lottery winnings had destroyed her relationship with siblings who felt entitled to share in her windfall. A couple whose business success had created expectations among extended family members that left them feeling more like ATMs than relatives. These conversations reinforced my belief that my experience with Emma and Sophia represented just one variation on a theme that affects many families dealing with financial disparities. The specific details differ, but the underlying questions remain the same. How do we teach our children to value relationships over possessions? How do we prepare them to be generous when they have resources and grateful when they receive help? How do we model the difference between earning comfort and expecting it? Emma and Sophia, meanwhile, had become actively involved in expanding the scholarship program beyond simple financial assistance. They developed mentorship components that paired recipients with successful professionals in their chosen fields. They created networking events that helped scholarship students build connections that would serve them throughout their careers. They established partnerships with employers who were specifically interested in hiring graduates from our program. These initiatives reflected their growing understanding that true generosity goes beyond writing checks. It involves investing time, attention, and ongoing support in helping people build better lives for themselves and their families. The transformation I witnessed in my daughters over the course of that year was more rewarding than any lottery jackpot could have been. They evolved from young women who saw success as primarily personal achievement into adults who understood that individual accomplishment carries with it a responsibility to lift others up as well. Emma eventually left her job in luxury marketing to start a nonprofit organization focused on financial education for young people from low-income families. The organization, which she named Foundation First, operates on the principle that understanding money management is as important as having access to money itself. Sophia transitioned from investment banking to healthcare administration, using her financial expertise to help hospitals and clinics operate more efficiently so they could serve more patients with limited resources. She specialized in developing programs that made quality medical care accessible to families who couldn't afford traditional insurance coverage. Both of them credited their work with the Scholarship Fund as the catalyst for these career changes. They had discovered that using their skills to create opportunities for others was more fulfilling than using those same skills simply to accumulate wealth for themselves. The ripple effects of my decision to test my daughter's values continued to spread in ways I never could have anticipated. The scholarship recipients began establishing their own giving programs once they became established in their careers. The media coverage of our story inspired other lottery winners to be more strategic about their philanthropy. The book sparked conversations in families across the country about money, values, and the true meaning of success. But perhaps the most important outcome was the healing and strengthening of my relationship with Emma and Sophia. The crisis that had revealed their capacity for selfishness also created an opportunity for growth that brought us closer together than we had ever been before. We now meet monthly to review scholarship applications and discuss the impact of our giving. These meetings often turn into longer conversations about life, relationships, and the lessons we're all still learning about what it means to live with integrity and purpose. During one recent meeting, Sophia made an observation that struck me as particularly insightful. "Mom," she said, "I used to think that your test was unfair because you had information we didn't have. But now I understand that life is always testing us with information we don't have. The measure of who we are isn't whether we make perfect decisions, but whether we're willing to learn from our mistakes and do better next time." Emma nodded in agreement. "I think the real test wasn't whether we would help with your medical bills once you knew you could afford them. The real test was whether we would choose to grow from understanding how badly we had misjudged what mattered." These insights from my daughters confirmed something I had suspected all along. The most valuable thing I could give them wasn't money or comfort or protection from life's challenges. It was the opportunity to discover who my daughters really were and to help them discover who they wanted to become. They had allowed me to create opportunities for hundreds of other young people while teaching my own children about the responsibility that comes with privilege. The Margaret Chen test had revealed some uncomfortable truths about my family, but it had also created possibilities for growth, healing, and positive impact that none of us could have imagined when this whole adventure began. And in the end, that transformation was worth far more than any amount of money could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.